Hello, everyone. That Weems guy here for another episode, and we're recording this at 9:45 on a Thursday night, and so maybe we'll both be awake by the end of the episode, but maybe not. Here tonight, joining me is Johnston, and we'll get into that in just a second. But um, I want to, before I introduce John, actually before John introduces himself, just want to thank him publicly again. The first big podcast thing that I did as a guest as I started breaking into the national firearm scene was on Ballistic Radio. So it's kind of fun to me to have John here on this show and kind of um, repay that kindness and that thing. So before I turn it over to John for a second, I just wanted to say that. John?
Well, I appreciate that, Lee. What am I supposed to do? Who am I and why
Yeah.
should people care?
Yeah, you're the professional at this. I'm just sitting in my kitchen.
Well, I'm professional. That's scary. But I suppose so. So I'm John Johnston. I host Ballistic Radio. I've worked as a consultant inside of the firearms industry, and also done training with Citizens Defense Research. And I'm wearing sweatpants and have a pistol on that's got 18 rounds of gold dot in it and an aim point acro P2 on it. So I guess I would be considered pro red dot. So
I am not wearing a pistol right at the moment, but there is several 12 gauges sitting right over there that are loaded. So I'm
it's
okay.
probably a little better.
I'm okay. I'll be all right.
Yeah.
And I have a loaded terrier around here somewhere as well.
So I got like 3 cats upstairs and a redhead. So
so we are going to discuss tonight on this episode other discussions that are taking place on the internet. This week, Ken Hackathorn released a video on the Wilson Combat YouTube channel in which he mentioned red dots. And before you go in, okay, to the audience, here goes Lee again on this whole red dot thing. We're not going to concentrate on that so much, at least at first. We're going to kind of discuss the discussions or the screaming back and forth that is taking place. So Ken Hackathorn released this video, and he basically said you don't really need a dot. But he also said if you're a person that goes out and trains and will maintain it and everything, by all means, go for it. You may see some benefit. The numbers I'm about to give you come straight from YouTube. It does not take into account Facebook, where it's been shared in discussion forums, etc. As of this afternoon, Hackathorn's video had been viewed 126,000 times, and it had a little over 2,000 comments on the YouTube channel. Now, at the same time, all this is taking place, Ben Steger has released a video where he says basically the same things Hackathorn does, and it's been viewed a little less than 3,000 times and has 50 comments. But he says pretty much the exact same thing. But Mr. Hackathorn is being either praised or vilified with great vehemence on either side. And Mr. Steger's basically just not getting noticed. But they're both real prominent guys in the shooting industry. Now, I will say I'm aware of Ben Steger in the same way that I'm aware that LeBron James plays basketball, but I've never watched a game that he plays in, not in the NBA.
So now is probably a good time for me to do full disclosure, right? Yeah. So full disclosure, I'm sponsored by Wilson Combat and have been for a long time. Now my deal with them has always been I say what I say, and if they don't like it, I assume they'll stop paying me money. But you know, so just so no one's like playing gotcha games with you in the comments, like, wait a second. You know, and also full disclosure, I've known Ben for a while, and I wouldn't go so far as to say we're friends, but we were certainly acquaintances. You know, so I know Ken too. I've met him and, you know, regard him pretty highly. So the conversations that are taking place, and I'll sum it up, you know, if you would like me to.
Absolutely.
Sure. I'll hit this microphone too. Professional. So essentially, Ken, what's the most succinct way to say this? He pointed out some stuff with red dots and, posited that he wasn't sure if they were going to stay relevant or if they were going to be a fad. I watched this whole video, and I watched this whole video because a bunch of people were like, "Oh my God, did you see this? Why are I had a couple of my students be like, why is everyone so upset?" And that actually made me feel good because it's made me think that maybe I've encouraged people to think critically and like actually listen to what people are saying. At least I'd like to pretend that I had something to do with that. And then I had some other people that were like, "Oh my God, what do you think of what Ken Hackathorn said?" And so I'm like, okay, apparently I need to watch this. And I watched it. And, he said one thing that is patently false. Like, I don't agree with it. And the research doesn't support it. And that was essentially, if you've shot 100,000 rounds, and you would need 101,000 rounds to overwrite that. And, I don't believe that to be true. But aside from that, everything he said, I either agreed with or, depending on the context that he was speaking about, and he wasn't super clear on the context in some instances, like, I'm like, okay. And like, I would have some questions, but, for the most part, his point boiled down to, if you don't train, they're not going to help you. I agree with that 100%, like 1,000,000% actually. And then the other one was that no one needs a red dot on their pistol. I'm like, yeah, no one does. Now, and that's not to say that certain people might not see benefit from it, but as far as need, like level of need that, if you don't do this, you're gonna be disintegrated in the thoroughfare. No, I don't think anyone needs one. And I've said something similar in the past about weapon mounted lights, and people didn't like it when I said that. So, and that's not to say that, I don't use a red dot, because I do. And it's not to say that I don't use weapon mounted lights, because I do, but I'm not going to tell anyone they need one. And frankly, if you gave me a handheld and iron sights, I'd bet on me 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, I share a similar opinion on weapon lights. If I'm out actively hunting bad guys, I want a weapon light on my pistol. If I'm just walking around in the world, I typically don't carry with a weapon light.
Well, I've already done that episode with Chuck Haggard, and he's going to
Yeah.
say better stuff than I ever would.
Yeah.
So I'll plug Ballistic Radio. You can go look that up.
Yeah.
But as far as, so that's what Ken said. And then what Steger said was, if you've got a really well-developed index, they're great. But if you don't have a really well-developed index, he thinks people would probably be better served with taking the money that they would spend on the red dot, putting that into ammo, and, develop that index. So that's,
again, not wrong.
no. And frankly, there are very few people that I will just, as far as when it comes to technical shooting, I'm pretty knowledgeable at that at this point. I feel pretty confident in that. And Steger's one of the people, if he says something, I'm going to go like, okay, and probably not disagree with him on too much, and the thing is that, I guess what struck me interesting about this was the number of people that apparently have based an entire personality around whether or not they have an optic on their pistol. It's strange.
A mutual friend of ours, and I do not have permission to quote him because what he quotes written was in a private discussion, referred to them as the RDS online activist complex. And I just laughed when I read that. And this is a guy who's very pro red dot.
Yeah.
Or pistol mounted optics, what we should refer to them as.
Yeah, I'm gonna. So what's funny is I've been doing them long enough at this point that when I started, they were called red dot sights, and like, okay, pistol mounted optics, that's cool. That's not what I'm gonna call them. So
well, sometimes some people have green. Some people don't have dots, they have chevrons. So
well, both of them are wrong.
Yeah.
And I feel strongly about that.
I really like the way you phrase that, is people that have based their entire personality.
I stole that. I actually stole that from a friend of mine, Paul Fitch. He's like, it's paraphrasing essentially, an optic on your pistol isn't supposed to be a personality.
Yeah.
And like, look, I really don't understand like how, well, I do understand because like I've been on the internet, but just the immediate, like vehement, like emotional response to that. Like even if you don't agree with a single thing he said, and let's say, and I'm not saying that that's how I feel, but let's say, hell, let's say that's how someone else feels. It's not like Ken like kicked down your front door, and performed unsavory acts on like the family pet, while cajoling you to take the optic off of your pistol. That's not what happened.
Right.
It's just like, geez.
Oh my gosh, he said something that I don't agree with. Now I must destroy him. That's what I don't get.
Well, good luck. Number one. Number two, this kind of goes to a wider point, right? The number of people that have a genuine opinion versus can regurgitate a talking point that is someone else's opinion that they look up to. Those are two very different things. And I'm not judging who is who inside of that, but it's just something I encounter quite a bit. And I'll have people argue with me about products that I worked on, like before they were released to the public, and then I had this happen last year. Someone's like telling me about literally a thing that I was in the room when we decided to do it, and then I was involved during its development. They're like, do you really know about this? I'm like, I feel like maybe a tiny bit.
Oh, welcome to the internet, where someone explained to me what happened in a case in which I testified as an expert witness.
Yeah. And so what's that about? I don't know. But I mean, so if people just want to stop listening now, I guess what we could just very simply say, like,
well, let's don't do that. We need them to actually listen to the entire show.
Well, I don't need them to listen to the entire show. You need them to listen to the entire. No, I'm well, I mean, that's true too, though. But no, it's I don't know.
Well, here's where I got some of my angst from the discussions in one of the groups on Facebook in which it came up. There was a guy who was very upset with what Mr. Hackathorn said. Now, I have met Ken Hackathorn. I took a class from him in 2014, and I made such an impression on him that he does not remember me from the class. We have had a phone conversation recently, and we swapped a few emails on some topics. But I know his background. And so I know where he forms the basis of his opinion. And for one thing, the people that saying, oh, he's old and out of touch and all this kind of stuff, well, I can guarantee you, while he may not be out teaching classes anymore, he's still very, very in knowing of what's going on in the industry. He's still in contact with lots of people still. And if you have a conversation with him now, he can tell you what's going on in certain people's classes based on, the chatter. But again, I know his background, so I know where he is basing his opinion from.
Yeah.
in this other discussion, one individual was very upset with it, and he was basically, vehemently disagreeing with Mr. Hackathorn, but he wasn't giving the background for the basis of his opinion. And so I kept asking him, please tell me your opinion. I mean, tell me your background. For all I know, you're a Navy SEAL that's in 20th group on your weekends. Tell me what your background is. Now it turns out the guy's got a background in the optics industry, but there's no application side background
And
that I'm aware of. But and he's just one person. I saw that as a common theme throughout a lot of the discussions. I will say, and on the Timmy side, said lovingly, you will hear people having discussions at classes, and you took this 2-day class from this tier 1 operator. You haven't earned that tier 1 operator's experience and opinion as your own. And you're not on a par with them. But at the same time, I also want to say that you can have all the technical experience in the world. It does not equal any application experience if you've never been on the application side. You can speak from a technical standpoint, but that's where your expertise needs to stay.
yeah, and frankly, for the discussion that was being had, I don't. So, and this is an interesting thing, right? I too know who Ken Hackathorn is. And I go one step further and say that he, along with some other people, are the reason that we have an industry that we recognize as the industry that we have, both in the training side and the personal protection side.
Yeah.
I doubt most people understand like what an influence he has had on things that we are doing today. Now, as far as his operational background, I don't think it matters in this instance, because he wasn't talking about that. And, so we can keep it purely technical. Well, let's just compare apples.
No, I don't think we can, because I think he's talking, because he was referencing, you load this gun and you put it in your nightstand, and then you have to use it in your, in a moment of need. That's, to me, that's application.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't need any experience to make that so that's application that frankly anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together can come up with. And that's not a comment on Ken. I'm saying that, as far as the idea that, the point that he made, you don't need experience to make that point. And yes, he's got experience, but like that has nothing to do with why that point is important, and it is an important point. So I'm not disagreeing with the point. I'm saying his background doesn't have anything to do with, what makes that smart, right? Yeah. And we can, whenever we get into background or stuff like that, we're getting into an appeal to authority to a certain level. And so like the reason why I respect Ken Hackathorn, does that have something to do with his background? Absolutely. But let's pretend that he's nobody. And let's just examine what he's saying, because then we can remove personalities from it entirely. And if we're examining what he's saying, and what he's essentially saying is, if you don't train, it's not going to help. Yes, I agree. And if you've spent a lot of time teaching yourself to focus on the front side of the gun, you might have some difficulty teaching yourself to target focus. Agreed. If you don't maintain it and don't practice with it, you could have problems. Agreed. Like every single point that is valid in there is valid because it's valid. And it has nothing to do with, who he is. It makes it good stuff to listen to. So like his background is, in this instance, is a red herring. And frankly, in some circles, his background is helping his argument. And then in other circles, anybody that's under 30, I guess, and doesn't know why Ken Hackathorn is important, and he is important, and just doesn't know, is looking at him and going, that's an old guy, and we don't trust those, and we shouldn't listen to them because they can't know anything. which is like a common thing that young people, I guess, do. I certainly used to do it. And I look back at that and I'm like, well, that was dumb. But like, I mean, if you remove Ken Hackathorn from this equation and just take what he said, right? Most of what he said, I agree with 100%, or I'd want to ask some clarifying questions. Like I said, the one point I disagree with is the thing he said about the 100,000 rounds. Like,
I agree with you to a certain extent, but if it wasn't someone of the stature of Ken Hackathorn saying it, 126,000 people wouldn't have watched this video.
well, yeah, but that's a red herring too, right?
Yeah.
So, and we're talking about it because a bunch of people got mad, so it's interesting and relevant to people, right? But if we're looking at just like, and this is the thing, and this is what I try and tell people, like, information is information, and you can examine it, and it'll either hold up or it won't. And pretty much everything he said matches my experience based off of the shooters I've seen. And then when you go and look at Steger, right, who's, so we've got 3 different people from 3 different backgrounds, 3 different, levels, experience, age groups, whatever. And, I guess I'm pro'd out at this point because I put one on all my guns, but I don't feel emotionally attached to them for whatever else anybody else does. But, when you've got 3 different people all saying the same thing, then it's not a matter of, the background. It's not my background. It's not Ken's background. It's not Steger's background, or at least it shouldn't be.
You and I have had this discussion offline, and I guess that's one of the things where our different backgrounds come into play, and to how much credibility we're willing to give to elders and the like. To me, I look at someone of the stature of Ken Hackathorn expressing an opinion. Okay, what he says has merit because who he is, and I don't see that as an appeal to authority. An appeal to authority would be saying, listen to me because I have an instructor certification in this. And I'm not talking about actual experience. I have an instructor certification in weapon retention, but I don't teach it because I don't think it would be credible for me to teach it. Ben Steger, I think there's credibility to what he's saying because he can back it up on the range. And all of his accolades that he has achieved, I think earns him the credibility to express an opinion. Whereas if that was a D-class shooter that nobody's ever heard of putting out that same information, who's even going to pay attention to it?
Well, and that's an interesting thing, though. And this is sort of speaking to my point, right? So I respect Ken Hackathorn because Ken Hackathorn is worth respecting. Not because Ken Hackathorn is older than me and has been doing this longer than me, because I know other people that are older than me and have been doing it longer than me that, I don't hold them any ill will, but,
well, I'm not saying you have to agree with it, accept it just because
no.
What I'm saying is, my personal relationship with Tom Givens. I don't agree with everything Tom says, but I listen and give credibility to everything he says.
Well, you shouldn't. I really think that everyone should be listening to whatever anybody says and at least approach it from, I'd like to examine the statement and, see if there's merit to it. And I think that is maybe why I'm being a little resistant here. So I'll give you an example. So Claude Werner is one of my mentors, and there was somebody that I had. I want to be very careful here. Another person in the industry that I have personal issues with, and they put out some information, and I made the mistake. Well, I didn't make the mistake because it ended up helping me out, but I said something to Claude, and he's like, well, I actually think the thing they said is a really good point, and it's really immature of you to let, how you feel about this individual cloud your ability to examine the information that they're giving, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of bristle a little bit whenever. So I like knowing someone's background so I can understand their context, right? But you know, and I actually saw this inside of a discussion that was being held in regards to Ken's video. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but paraphrasing, it was along the lines of, I'd be more inclined to listen to the opinion if they shot better, something like that. And I don't think they were speaking directly about Ken, but it was just inside of like this sphere, right? And I used to think the same way. And that happened to be a time period where I was really, really dumb. And it would have behooved me to listen to whatever anybody said and then think critically about it, as opposed to immediately discounting stuff because one person said it, or immediately, giving extra weight or credence because someone else said it. And where I'm trying to, and I guess where I'm trying to get people to that might be listening to this is, the disrespect that was shown to Ken inside of the comment sections from people that frankly I expect better from is completely separate from, the information that he gave. And frankly, what I think happened is a lot of people, went into what he was going to say just based off of the title. And it was a very well done title to get people to, hate click on it. So kudos. But, so people went into it already sort of with an idea in mind how they were going to feel about it. And then as soon as they felt something about it, they weren't actually listening to what was being said, or they purposely misconstrued some sloppy language. And again, that's not a dig at Ken. Like, I've presented all sorts of things on video and my language is sloppy all the time, and I'm like, so, but at the end of the day, like, I think we're talking about two separate things.
Yeah.
So like, issue number one is, why are people willing to trash talk someone that frankly they wouldn't even be commenting on the internet about this stuff if it wasn't for this dude? Like, if a butterfly flaps its wings and Ken Hackathorn doesn't be Ken Hackathorn, I don't know how much of this is here anymore. So like, that's issue number one. And then issue number two, a completely separate issue, is, what was the validity of the information that he gave in the video? Now, as far as the validity of the information he gave in the video, I've already shared my opinion on that. There was one thing that the research doesn't support that. Everything else I pretty much agree with, or I would want to ask clarifying questions about. And, so if we want to have a conversation about why are people who, as Craig Douglas once said it to me, are barely qualified to listen to the conversation. And I'm not speaking of anyone that we've mentioned previously. I'm just saying, like, open commenters on like the YouTube video or wherever, why are they willing to, denigrate someone that they shouldn't?
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't. That's a separate conversation in general, which could probably, the answer would be summed up as, it's the internet, or it's 2022, or, whatever other way you want to say that we are at the we're at the very predictable outcome of what happens when discourse is no longer encouraged in our society. So
yeah, if the reason one of the reasons I brought up this Taker video at the same time, is because of one of the comments you raised is, well, if he shot better, well, who shoots better than Ben Steger?
Not many
Yeah,
people.
yeah, and he's saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and again, and
yeah, yeah,
that frankly reinforces the point that I'm trying to make.
yeah. Well, the point I'm making, and probably I must be making it poorly. Um,
No, you're not making
yeah,
it poorly, Lee.
right, right,
I'm
no,
running
yeah.
away with your show. I apologize.
So um, I'm not qualified to offer opinions on the internal combustion engine to tell ASC certified mechanic that he's wrong.
Well, I mean, and that's an interesting thing too, in
Yeah.
so much that,
Well, another example, I was having my air conditioner worked on, and come home, and the guy's there, he's got it torn apart, and he says something about the air conditioner, the way it operates, and he asked my opinion on it. And I said, sir, the reason you're here doing this is because I don't know how to. Tell me what needs to be done to fix this, and how much is it going to cost? Well, don't even tell me that. Tell me how much is it going to cost me to fix this?
well, and here's a question. What qualifies me to have an opinion about red dots? Is it the couple 100,000 rounds I fired? You know, is it what is it? Why am I allowed to have an opinion about red dots? Why is Ken allowed to have an opinion about red dots? Why is Ben? Why are other people not? You know, is Ken
Yeah.
qualified to, because he never taught red dots, as far as I know, not on pistols.
Well, see, and that's one of the things I'm saying is I want to know what the basis of your opinion is when you give it. To me, that's part of evaluating the opinion.
Yeah. Well, and so,
and like you personally, what gives you were one of the first people in my circle of people that I know, and being first doesn't mean a lot in the grand scheme of things, but you were one of the early people in this whole modern pistol mounted optic thing that has come along to go down that road. And you and I were having discussions about dots 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
well, funny enough, I had and I don't think anybody knows this because I was not working professionally in the industry. But as far as I know, I had the very first HKP 30 that had an optic mounted to it. Mark Housel at L&M Precision did it for me in 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. After, David Bowie told me it wasn't possible to do it.
Right.
Like,
I remember us having pistol mounted optic discussions before it was even a thing in the training world. And we've had numerous discussions throughout the years on that. I want to go to knowing people who have actually done work with the stuff. And all I'm asking is that when people are going to give their opinion, or when they're going to argue with an opinion, that they state their background and the basis for which their opinion came from.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the issue there is that when you ask a question like that, you are very much and genuinely approaching it from a place of, I would like to understand where this opinion is coming from. Now, a lot of people, when they do stuff like that, what they're really looking for is a way to, find something to disagree with, like in the background, that will immediately invalidate the opinion. And either way, so for me at this point, and and we have had conversations about, I'm not as impressed by some things as I maybe should be, and I know why. And it's been reinforced from me from a very early age that sometimes backgrounds don't mean much. So, and that's one of my hangups, right? And it's caused me problems, and it's done good things for me in equal measure. So again, like, if someone is trying to make sense of all this, and they're like, all right, here's one person saying this stuff, and I should care what they say because here's who they are. And then here's this other person saying this other stuff. And, they're saying the direct opposite of what this other person is saying. And I should care what they say because of who they are. No, just, okay, we can make this real easy. Let's just take the thing that they're saying. And, if we have the frame of reference to where we can examine it and have an informed opinion about the statement, cool. And if not, and most people fall into this category, you should view it for what it is, which is entertainment. You know, and possibly, food for thought if you are going to pursue a higher education in this, but most people don't want to.
One day I walked out of the sheriff's office and was going to one of the other buildings on our complex, and a gentleman approached me on the sidewalk. And he's immediately expressing his concern over an issue that that he had imagined was going to take place. And he finally stopped and he asked me what my position on it is. And I explained the legalities of the issue and why I don't think what he was concerned about was really an issue. And at the time I was not quite 40, and this was an older gentleman. And he asked, young man, how old are you? And I told him, I'm many years your senior, and I believe you're wrong, and all this kind of stuff. I said, yes, sir. And I said, sir, what do you do for a living? And he told me. And I said, sir, do you have lots of education and training in that area? Oh, yes, I have a degree in this, and I have so many years experience having done it, everything. I said, well, sir, I have no education and no experience in your field of work. What would you think what would you say if I started trying to give you advice on how to do your job? And he said, well, I would think you're a fool. I said, yes, sir. How many years of experience do you have as a law enforcement officer? And he raised his head back and says, are you calling me a fool? I said, no, sir, but I believe you just did. And that's part of my commitment. Is I want to know the basis of where you form your opinion rather than you're just saying. I don't believe just the fact that you make the statement that the statement is worthy of being examined just to examine it in of itself. And I could be wrong on that. That could be a personal hang up for me. And but I am going to disclose that's my point of view.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, so and you're being very kind, because if you really wanted to, you've known me long enough that you could point out several instances many years ago where I'm the stupid dude in the comment section talking about stuff that I really shouldn't be talking about. And I appreciate that you're not, but I'll bring it up, and so I've been on either side of this coin, right? And we all have. I think that's part of the human experience. And hopefully if you mature, you can look back on your younger years and slight embarrassment with chagrin and go, well, that was dumb. And all I'm saying, and when I say, hey, look, I don't need to know Ken's background. Mm-hmm. Let's just look at what he's saying. I'm not saying that for you, right? I'm not saying that for anybody other than, the people that might be where I was 10 years ago that should be embarrassed, but don't know that they should be. And like, hey, let's not make it about who this person is and why you are inclined to not agree with them. Mm-hmm. And let's just look at what's being said. And what was being said is, if you don't train, it won't help you, which is what every other person that knows anything would say about anything else. So it's not an older guy with gray hair and a mustache saying it. It's just information. And when we remove that, It's not a boomer. It's not a FUD. It's not whatever pejorative that I cannot imagine ascribing to Mr. Ken Hackathorn. It's just information that no one would disagree with. And
Actually, a lot of people disagree with the information, even if you take him out of it.
they're
Because
wrong.
because it goes against their own emotional choice.
Well, and so if, and again, this is where context comes into play. If the argument is it's easier to take an untrained person and train them with a red dot than it is to train them with iron sight, yes, I agree completely.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a separate thing. So, and this is something I am guilty of in my personal life. When I get emotional about something, instead of solving the issue, I'm going to bring up all of these other unrelated things. I have an amazingly difficult time actually talking about the thing that is being discussed. So I get it. I'm not throwing any stones there. That's a real big glass house. So, rocks inside of that is probably something I should be concerned about. And if we break this down point by point, and and frankly, I kind of regret not making a bullet point list of like actually every single thing and talking about it. There was really only one thing in there that, like I said, I'm like, yeah, nah. And then everything else is, either yes or maybe.
Yeah. And of course, I'm going to admit too that I'm kind of amused by the whole thing, because I've said the same stuff Mr. Hackathorn said, and I get lambasted for it, but I don't get viewed. I don't have the same audience and reach that he's got, nor the credibility that he has because of his years of experience. But I have been on the receiving end of much of the same, although not the same quantity, but the same angst of, I talk about things that I have gone out and tested with the pistol mounted optic as part of my evaluation. And I get told, well, you just need to do more work with the dot. Well, I was doing the work with the dot, and that's where this question came from.
Yeah. Well, and so and we've talked about, we had a personal conversation because, in one of the groups that we're in, you're like, every time I try and talk about this with proponents, they sort of hand wave, and I'm like, I want to have that conversation. And you brought some stuff up, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's a thing. And there are workarounds to it, right? But this is and this is something that we all know as well. Unless you acknowledge that a problem is there, you can't do anything to mitigate the problem. And there are issues with red dots. They cost more than an iron-sighted pistol, period. Depending on how they're mounted, I know that you are of the opinion that unless it's direct milled, you don't want to.
As I'm carrying it in the gun in the field to use it as a protective tool. On the range, I've got plate guns.
Yeah, well, and I don't share that experience because I've put enough rounds and beat the crap out of enough different optics plates. I have opinions about certain ones, and there are absolutely certain ones that I want nothing to do with. But there are ones that are fine in my experience, and my experience is based off of more than most people are going to do to a gun, right? So I feel pretty comfortable with that. There are certain things that it's funny, a lot of the people are really good with red dots when they're standing still aren't so good with them when they're not standing still, if that's a problem they haven't worked before.
Right.
I've seen that a lot. And so and all of this stuff, and this is like everything else we do, every single other thing that we do, there are pros and cons to what we're doing, and if there's a con, there's usually a way to mitigate that. But unless you admit that or can recognize all right, here are some positives, here are some negatives, I'm going to try and address the negatives without losing any of the positives. You can't do that if you're just like, no, these are awesome. No, they're just a thing. And they offer some advantages. The one thing that I was kind of iffy on, and so one of the things that Ken said was they don't offer any advantages inside of 10 yards. I need to think about that a little bit more, but I don't think, just like knee jerk, I don't think I agree with that. But I would also put a big old "it depends" following that.
I can argue both sides of that one.
No, I could too,
Um,
which is why I would just say it depends.
yeah, I could argue both sides of that one. Uh, you, I took the step of doing some low light testing with the pistol mounted optic, and I discovered a flaw in my personal technique that when I came back and reported that to some knowing people, oh yeah, you've got to do whatever. Well, they knew the answer because they had also done the testing.
Yeah,
Well, if you hadn't done that low light work, you wouldn't even know to ask the question.
right. Well,
And so that's where, I go back to, I want to know what your background is as far as what all you've done with it.
Well, and it was funny because you brought it
Yeah,
up to me, and I'm like, well, here's the way I solve that, but here are
yeah,
3 other ways that you can solve it too. And
right.
it's like, so
And if all you've done is stand on a flat range shooting B8s at 25 and go, oh yeah, these are the thing, you don't even know there's a problem in these other areas.
well, and that was an interesting thing too. And I saw, I want to be careful here.
Yeah.
Recently I saw another pretty well-known trainer
Mm-hmm.
is using a piece of equipment on one of their guns that is not in keeping with what the current meta of that piece of equipment is, as far as capability, output, whatever you want to say. And someone else was like, why are they what? And I know the background of this specific person, the trainer, and I know ish the background of the person that was asking the question. And then another very several very well-known people that also have very impressive backgrounds are like, well, you need to understand where this person's coming from. So like background matters to understand. Like, here's why background is important in my opinion. Not necessarily to give weight to what the person is saying or not saying, because frankly, someone should be able to explain their position without falling back on any sort of background at all. It doesn't matter. But it's important to understand context, because if one person, for instance, is talking about low light, and most of the experience they have with low light is under night vision, versus your experience with low light, which is, hunting for bad guys, versus my experience with low light, which is mainly using it as a control implement, or a managing unknown contacts sort of thing, or frankly, as a low level use of force. Like, those are all very different contexts where we all want very different things. And I've used a light as pepper spray more than I've ever used pepper spray, which is not the same as, using white light to hunt bad guys and on an alarm call, which is not the same thing as, using a white light to, ID a dude I just shot under night vision. And I got to confirm that this is actually who I thought. And I can't quite tell when it's, green and black, so that background matters there. I don't know, but information's information.
Another thing that Mr. Hackathorn touched on is, or alluded to, is the guy that puts this dot on their gun and then goes and puts it in the drawer and doesn't touch it. John Herm was involved in the conversation at this point that you and I were also in. And we got into the discussion of the additional maintenance that's required. And just what we see from the law enforcement side is keeping Aimpoint Pro tied on your rifle and the battery changed in that, which is so much easier than, say, changing the battery in an RMR. It creates much more of a maintenance issue, not necessarily a problem, but maintenance requirement, I guess would be the better term to use. And that goes to where Mr. Hacklund was talking about the 1% of the people. Okay, the people that are listening to this show are probably in that 1% that are going to be fine and would maintain their equipment. What Mr. Hacklund was, I think, addressing to was to the low level user that's not in that, they might be biting off more trouble by putting this dot on their gun.
Maybe. It's hard to say. And, so again, it depends, right?
Mhm.
And we're making a lot of assumptions here. And this is kind of where, so the person you were talking about, where you were asking their background, I know their background. And, because I benefit from knowing that, like, I value their opinion as far as there are certain optics that if you stick it in a drawer, the technology exists that optics probably, I mean, it might have dust bunnies,
Yeah.
but otherwise, depending on what optic they get, and even some of what people would consider the cheaper ones, are going to be fine. And like, well, and I know that too, because I've left optics sitting for a couple of years. I've actually been using them long enough to have an opinion on this too, right?
Yeah.
And so like now, and this is one of those things where all of us are real good at making assumptions that support the position that we've already decided we want to take on whatever the issue is. And depending on how I felt about it, I could look at the thing that Ken said and either agree with it or vehemently disagree with it. And I could argue either way on it. And, so had I been there with Ken when that was going on, and it was, me asking him questions, I'm not going to make statements to Ken Hackathorn. I'm just going to ask questions, right? Because I feel like that's about the only level that I am at in comparison. But, the question I would have in that instance is, are we assuming that low information people have low information gear? And I think that's a safe assumption 9 times out of 10, but not always. Maybe they have someone in their lives that does know what they're doing.
I can
And
point to exactly such a circumstance that goes right to this issue.
okay,
An individual that I bought his rifle and I bought his optic and I issued it to him. And then I have him in a class down the road and he complains that the reticle or the dot in his optic is not bright. And I look at it, take his rifle, and I look, and sure enough, it's extremely dim. I said, when is the last time you changed the battery in this optic? And his response to me was, they said these batteries would last 5 years. Okay, so you're telling me you've never changed the battery in your optic? Yeah, because they said these batteries would last 5 years. And I looked at him and said, did you account that 5 years may have been part of the time it was in the shelf? The packaging on the shelf and everything.
well,
So
I mean,
you're, yeah, but you're,
and what
yeah,
I would say,
yeah,
Lee, as
yeah,
someone really familiar with optics, I'd
yeah,
go, I'm never going to trust a battery that comes with the optic, period. So like,
right.
that's where I'm at on
Yeah,
this. So
yeah.
that's the mistake you made. You
Well,
set them up for failure, Lee.
no, because he should have
That's
changed
fair.
his battery.
Well, yeah, no, you should have changed his battery. He was trusting you.
Uh,
I'm kidding for anyone that's
yeah,
not watching the video. This is
yeah,
very tongue in cheek, but here's the thing, man. Like, look, honestly, you know what? So let's say somebody puts a gun in their drawer and they put an optic on it and it's in that drawer and they pull it out and the optic is deader than fried chicken. All right. Battery toast. It's got like the little oxidization coming out of the bottom of the optic. It's probably not going to matter. They're probably going to stick that gun up in front of their face inside of their house and get pretty good hits either way. And, even if they don't, like, typical, right? And to be clear, and I know a bunch of people are going to be like, no, that's the reality. Like, we've got video after video after video after video after video of people with zero training using suboptimal gear, utilizing violence of action and will to survive to overcome all sorts of stuff. And, again, I don't think sucking less than the other guy is a good plan for success, but that is the reality. And to be very clear here, the class I teach the most of is very high level technical shooting with a pistol, many of them with slide mounted optics. So I'm not sitting here going good enough. I've worked pretty hard to be pretty good. And I'd like to be better. So I'm not saying that you just settle for that, but again, like, there are so many variables here that making any sort of absolute statement about if someone does this, and look, man, so many different things could happen and go wrong or not go wrong or go well or not go well. It was an opinion, and it was a pretty informed opinion, and I agreed with most of it. And the parts I didn't agree with, I would want to ask clarifying questions about. And the one thing that I really, really didn't agree with, I would like to send some, reference material to, because I don't think that says anything about him other than when he formed that opinion, that data didn't exist. And that's it. Who cares? Like, and frankly, this is the part that makes me a little angry. There are so many people that we don't have the opportunity to hear what they think anymore, that were massively influential to what we do, like, that are just like, are lost like tears in rain, all those moments. And the fact that we have somebody that is putting content out, that we can hear the thought process. People don't understand how, I wanted to curse real badly. People don't understand how lucky we are, because there are plenty of people that, so Todd Green was someone that I respected and admired quite a bit, was very influential to me, that made a lot of statements about red dots before he passed, that today, now, in this moment, I would say, hey, Todd, you were wrong. But you know what? I think he would have gotten there. I think he would have explored and gotten there. And so, and I would, God, I would give anything to be able to hear what he thought about that. And, Ken's not going to be here one day, and we're not going to be able to hear what he thinks. And that's going to be a tragedy. The same way it's a tragedy that William April's not around anymore. The same way it's a tragedy that Pat's gone, or Louis Auerbach, or any, Paul Gomez, any number of people since I've started doing this, and some of whom were friends of mine, that just aren't here anymore. And people are like looking at this, like, it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. You should be thankful that it's there to begin with. Period. Full stop. Yep. And, so that's the part that kind of, speaking of the one thing that I was saying, like, man, I'm trying to imagine knowing who Ken Hackathorn is, calling him a FUD or a boomer.
Yeah.
No. And like, so I'll give you a pass if you don't know, I guess, but it's still, I don't think that's not how I want to be. That's not how I want to behave. But like, if you know who Ken Hackathorn is and you say that, say it to his face and see what you think afterwards. Like, because he's not somebody I would say that to if I thought it, and I don't think it.
Right.
I'm
thinking of it, and I don't drink, but there's a Guinness commercial. And it's Joe Montana sitting at a bar, drinking a Guinness. And so I can't comment on the quality of Guinness, but there's a young guy sitting there at the bar.
Guinness is
And
like one of my favorite beers, so I got experience here too.
so there's a young guy sitting there at the bar having one, and another guy sitting there and says something to Joe Montana. It's light and smooth, kind of like you were when you played, Joe. And the guy looks over, the young guy looked and said, "Oh, you're a tennis player or something?" And Montana just goes, "Sure, kid," and takes another drink. And it's kind of like some of the people are that young guy at the bar. They just don't know who the guy is that they're calling, saying these things about. Okay, if you shoot USPSA, he was part of who set that up. If you shoot IDPA, he's part of who set that up.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So what's funny to me is the people that are real pro optic right now.
Mm-hmm.
So competition is always driven the tactical, always. And so the prevalence of pistol mounted optics currently, a lot of that's coming from the benefits that we're seeing in the competition world a long time ago, all of which wouldn't exist if it weren't for people like Ken Hackathorn and some others. So like the thing that you feel real strongly about, again, like I said, butterfly flaps its wings in South America somewhere at some point. Ken Hackathorn doesn't do what he does. There might not be slide mounted optics. And I'm not, I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but like, I genuinely don't know because, there are any number of, I'm a relative nobody. And the number of people that have come up to me and said, hey, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you said or did this thing, and that really resonated with me. So I did this thing. And I'm like, well, that's cool. I don't remember doing that, but I'm glad, and like, somebody recently, the last person that got a turbo pin from Gabe White recently shared an article that one of my coworkers, Melody Lauer, wrote a number of years ago and said, this was the article that made me get serious about this. So if Melody Lauer doesn't write that article, does he have a turbo pin? I don't know. And he's the one that did the work. So I'm not trying to give credit to Melody. What I'm saying is all of these things are so interconnected that, when we're looking at stuff like this, and you see somebody that's saying something that maybe you don't agree with, and, and I understand that I'm arguing two sides here because I just got done saying his background doesn't matter. And his background doesn't matter for the technical things that he was saying because they stand on their own merit as statements. They don't have anything to do with his background. So now we're talking about essentially the people that are willing to call him names. I don't think you'd be doing that if you understood what he's done for us. And I'm sure that if he heard this, he'd be like, well, I don't know about that. Like I do.
He does listen to he watches the YouTube version of the show.
Well,
some of them anyway.
Yeah. Well, gee, I think he might watch this one. I have a feeling. Hell, you'll probably email him the link if I had to guess.
No, I don't go that far.
All right. Well, either way, like this is all stuff that I don't care if he hears this or not. I would say this to anybody, right? And I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I kind of get it. I kind of get it because, I was dumb too. And I had an inflated sense of self-importance a number of years ago. And I don't now. So, which is good. Right. But I get it. I guess I get where it's, I get where it's coming from. I would just,
Well, I think our current age of technology allows people to develop a sense of self-importance to a level that was not available back when,
Mm,
Mr. Hackathorn was earning his chops, when Dave Spalding, all those guys, they had to get through an editorial filter, and we can just flip a switch or hit upload and get out to the world. Whereas, they actually had to have writing skill and get through an editor and et
mm,
cetera.
I mean, so
Uh,
I'm a gun writer, right?
yeah.
So I don't know that.
Well, here's the thing though, John. Are you a gun writer because people pay you to write content for them, or are you a gun writer because you put stuff up on your own webpage and say you're a gun writer?
People pay me to write content for them.
There's a difference, but there are people out there that say, I have a blog. You have a blog because you went to WordPress and created it yourself and started putting stuff on the internet. I have a podcast. Yeah, I record it in my kitchen and I started it. The internet did not come to me and beg me to start doing a podcast.
Well, I mean, so I'm kind of, so theoretically you're a competitor, which I don't think of, but it's like I think it's kind of cool, right? Because, if I wanted to, depending on how you wanted to look at it, I've been doing ballistic radio for 10 years now. And before what I did, really the closest thing was Mass Ayub had the Polite Society podcast. He kind of did that. The format was a little bit different, but like there are a lot of podcasts now that weren't there before I was doing what I was doing, which is weird, and I think about that every once in a while, right? But did I have anything to do with that? No, I don't think so. Um, um, but and ADHD and my meds have worn off at this point. But I say that to say, as far as I've met people that are paid to do that job and I'm paid to do that job, and me personally, so you can form whatever opinion you want to form about people that are paid to do a job and the value of their opinion, right? Um, again, I'm trying very hard, just in like stuff I'm trying to do personally, right? I'm trying to examine thoughts and ideas independent of who is expressing the thought or the idea. And, so I cannot remove the biases I have. There are certain people that I am favorably disposed towards, and there are certain people that I am the opposite towards. But who I am trying to be is the sort of person that will look at information. And if I don't have, a lot of time with the subject that's being discussed, because certain stuff I can discount immediately because the position that is being espoused is a position that I've already examined and pulled apart and understand the argument, right? But like if it's something I haven't considered before, I might want to know who's saying it just so I understand where they're saying it from. Like, if we're discussing ready positions, hey, did you spend more time on helicopters or rubber boats? Like, okay, that's something I want to know. But for the most part, like honestly, look, the number of people that have a negative reaction to what Ken said because Ken is an older guy that said it versus the number of people that if the same people watch Steger say what he said, all right, and didn't even know who he was. And that's the thing. So like, yeah, okay, one of the best shooters in the world. So that's why people that's not what it is. If you put Steger on Wilson Combat's video, no one knows who Steger is, but he's a guy in his late 30s saying what he says. More people are going to react favorably to it than the people that reacted to Ken. But flat out. Like didn't have anything to do with his background, didn't have anything to do with what he was saying, It was an old white guy saying something, and what the hell do they know? And because again, the internet culture right now, like societal culture, that's we all of us are so damn divisive over everything. And no one wants to listen. No one wants to, just look at what's being said and examine it, from a place of good faith. And be like, all right, is there value in this? Is there not? Okay, I don't agree. And if you don't agree, cool. You don't agree. So what?
All right.
Why?
Well,
Why? Here's a really good question. I would like for everyone listening
Huh?
to ask themselves this: why does your opinion matter? Why does mine matter? Why does yours matter, Lee? Like, who are we? Like, my opinion only matters if you think it matters, and if you don't think it matters, it doesn't matter. Like, the only value my opinion has is the value that people find in it.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not like offering my opinion on something thinking it's valuable just because I said it. It's only as valuable as you find it, and it's worth exactly what you paid for
Well, if I may quote myself, the only opinions that matter are the ones that you seek.
it.
And yeah, I'm only going to seek the opinions of people I respect or that I think have knowledge in the area that I'm seeking an opinion from. But before we go spinning back down that road, or to avoid spinning back down that road, anything you would like to address as an end user training issue to address some of the issues with using an optic?
Yeah. Look, so there's okay, let's just talk dot stuff for a couple seconds, minutes, whatever. If you can't find the dot, it's your grip. Probably like 9 times out of 10. Like if I'm troubleshooting, like, if I have a student in class that can't find their dot, it's inconsistent grip and consistent presentation, probably, right? And you're doing the same thing with your irons, except it's really obvious with the dot. What else? If the dot's not there, just shoot your irons, and if the dot comes back, shoot that, and if it doesn't, just shoot your irons. It's the same as and here's what's funny, because Ken mentioned lasers on guns in the video, and and what he doesn't say is he used to work with Crimson Trace a lot and developed a bunch of training. Pepperidge Farm remembers. I remember Ken. So, and it's the same way with lasers, right? So people don't like lasers on handguns right now because they don't know how to train them, and the technology hasn't continued to develop because other stuff came along. But if you were going to use a laser and irons in conjunction with each other, if it's whatever sighting system you pick up first is the one that you use. And if a better sighting system comes along, that's the one that you use. The optic is the primary sighting system for me, period. I set my irons up to support the use of the optic. I know some people are like, I'm going to zero my optic, then I'm going to zero my irons. No, that's not what I do. I zero the optic, then I make sure that the irons are pretty much slave to the optic. Because one, I've not met, I know some people are like, well, they could be different. No. Explain that to me. Like, if your optic's zeroed and you line your irons up on that, yeah, okay, elevation might be a little different depending on your front, but like your windage is going to be your windage. And misses along a vertical axis are pretty okay most of the time, right? So I set my irons up to support my optic. My optic's not there, I shoot my irons. If the dot comes back, that's what I want to be using. I just transition back to it. If it doesn't, then I just shoot the irons. I don't ever look for the optic. And that's the mistake that most people make, because what everyone's got like this, they've been to a range and they've seen this where it's like
For
Like,
those
no,
of you
don't.
listening, he's mimicking the whole looking for the dot, moving the hands
Yeah,
on.
well, I mean, some people are watching
Yeah,
on YouTube,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So like, don't do that. And I know some people are like, well, you don't need backup iron sights. Well, yeah, if everything goes well, you don't need seatbelts or an airbag either, but sometimes you really, really want to have it. And it's not about the optic failing. It's about we're humans and none of us are perfect. And no matter how much you want to pretend that you are on Instagram, that's not the case. And as soon as you start doing off-angle presentations or you slip, trip, or fall and end up on your back, or you're urban prone, or any number of other instances I can think of where maybe having backup irons is a good idea, I don't know. Yeah, maybe you want to do that, but I don't ever go hunting for the dot. And that's the easiest way to not do it, right? It's just set your irons up to support your dot. One of the big things that people um have a hard time with, as far as like focal plane, like they're going to look at the dot versus look at the target. There are ways to mitigate that. One of the easier ones is to occlude the optic, or at least that's one of the ones that is used as is one of the easier ones. Funny enough, I've never done that. I've never once actually personally done it. But I know that a lot of people have had a lot of success doing that as far as training themselves to look at the target. I've got some other stuff that I do instead that is not going to translate well to a podcast or a
Yeah.
YouTube video. And frankly, the biggest one, as far as difficulties that people have finding a dot on a presentation, is movement of the head
Mhm.
in relation to movement of the draw. And, so this is going to be theater of the mind for the people that are not watching the video, right? But for the people that are on YouTube, so if this is my fixed point in space where my eye target line is, right where my finger is, and I'm presenting the gun up from where I would present the gun up to, and I keep this fixed, the sighting system, if my eye target line stays fixed, my sighting system coming to a fixed point in space is way better than my eye target line dropping down while my sighting system rises up, and I'm trying to make them connect at a non-fixed point in space.
Essentially, you've got movement along two planes and you're trying to make them intersect.
Yeah, it's the difference between landing a plane on an aircraft carrier or a fixed runway on the land. Which one's easier? Just because you can do carrier landings. And I actually had a Navy pilot in one of my classes, and I made this analogy. It's like, yeah, yep.
Yeah.
It's
And to
like,
that point, I want, getting off of the square range mentality, is that whole problem is going to be exacerbated when you're moving at an angle to a target and you're ducking as you're presenting everything. All of that stuff is going to come into play.
it can. There are ways around that. Well, see, here's one of the thing. And I'm going to mute myself for a second to move this microphone because this will be good for video. Hold on.
For those of you that take the podcast on Spotify, you can actually watch the video on Spotify as well.
Oh, okay. So look, one of the things people say all the time is, don't move your head when you draw the gun. Well, that's cool. How do I do that? I actually have an exercise for that in class, right? And this one I'll give away for free. So if you think this is neat and you get value out of this, come pay me money in class. Or don't. I'd like to see you at class just because I like teaching people stuff, but whatever. Right. So the fix for this, the real easy fix for this, is if you have a training partner or you're an instructor and you want the student to stop dropping their head, what do? You put your hand on the back of their head and you say, hey, put some pressure into the back of my hand. Hey, do you feel that tension in your neck? Yeah, I do. Cool. All right, let's do some presentations right here. You maintain that pressure. What do people do? Their head stays up, just like this. Do a couple reps of that. Okay, cool. Now You felt that tension before, right? Yeah, cool. Make that tension happen. Okay. Give a couple presentations, just concentrating on that tension in your neck. All right, cool. Oh, look, your head's not dropping. Now, it's going to be weird at first. And it might even be uncomfortable at first because we exaggerate things as we're learning them, right? But like that's an easy way to give someone physical feedback on how to stop doing the thing rather than just don't do the thing. And that's and there's a bunch of stuff like that as far as, there are a lot of things that we teach that, hey, don't do that. Well, unless we give someone a strategy for not doing it, it doesn't help. Another way of thinking of the hey, don't move your head on the draw. How does a jock take a selfie? They put their head back, they try and make their traps in their neck look bigger. Again, this is going to play way better on video than it's going to play on podcast. Lee kind of smiled though when I did it, right?
Well, what I'm smiling at is the, hey, don't do this. I just flashed back to in the academy, them saying, don't jerk the trigger. Okay. Well, how do I not do that?
Let's not get there. Let's not get on the trigger jerk, Lee.
Yeah. But it's like, I asked the instructor, how do I do that? How do I not do that? And he's like, well, you don't jerk the trigger. Like, well, thank God you're here. And if someone says, don't do this, okay, well, how do I not do it? Well, you don't do it.
Well, it's like, how do I not beat my wife? Well, you just don't.
Yeah.
And now that's a really politically incorrect joke, right? But and there just reminds me of, nope, this is a tangent we don't need to go down. But there's all sorts of this stuff that a lot of the issues that you have encountered as far as like, hey, these are issues with pistol mounted optics. Like, yeah, they are. And there are workarounds for almost all of them. But, the people that say optics are awesome and there's no problems with them, they're not going to know those workarounds.
Because they're never going to know the question.
Well, or they're going to ignore it. And then, the flip side of that is, well, there are all these issues with optics. Well, yeah, there's issues with setting an explosion off 24 inches in front of your face too, but we've figured that one out. And that's kind of how I feel about all of this, right? But at the end of the day, does anybody need an optic on their pistol? No. Hell, you don't need a pistol until you do. And I don't, God, there are so many things to be upset about in the world today. Why would you be upset about a video that Ken Hackathorn made? Like, be upset about something that actually matters.
Yes, be upset about this video.
Here's something.
Don't.
Well, be upset about the energy that you spent being upset about a video on the internet that took away from the interactions you should have been having with the people in your life that matter. Think about that. And then think about, if you're the type of person that gets really upset about videos on the internet, how much of your life are you wasting doing that? What is that taking away from the people in your life that you matter to? Probably a whole hell of a lot. I'm going to Kermit the Frog sip my tea now.
Well,
that's none of my business.
When you get done sipping that tea, tell everybody where they can find you, what you got coming up.
If you go to citizensdefenseresearch.com, we actually have a website now. We are working on our 2023 schedule. The last class of the year is going to be December, I want to say 8th and 9th. Caleb Giddings is teaching his fundamental revolver skills class in Dallas, Texas. Wayne Dobbs is hosting him out there, and there are only 2 spots left to that. And then as of right now, we've got a bunch of stuff that's coming up. There's some stuff in Ohio that's on the schedule in April next year. There's stuff in Maine in June of next year. And there's actually going to be some stuff added to the schedule It's been finalized. I just haven't put it up yet. In Oklahoma, at everyone's favorite range in Oklahoma, in June of next year. But
You're aware that it's hot in Oklahoma in June, right?
I, dude, I'm fat. It's hot wherever I go, whenever I go there. So, but aside from that, if you want to listen to Ballistic Radio, you can do that. Ballisticradio.com. We're on all the podcasting services. I think. I don't handle that part of it, right? But we're on season 10 now, which is terrifying to me. This is now my longest job ever by far. And I haven't been fired or gotten or quit yet, but I work for me, so that's probably why, right? But aside from that, I'll be all the usual places. I'll be at TACCON this year, so if you want to come and tell me I'm dumb, I agree with you probably. And if you if you want to argue with me on the internet, you're probably going to be disappointed because I'm just going to say it depends. Or if I really, really disagree with what you say and be like, well, all right, be well. That's how I'm frustrated. If I tell someone to be well, that's my version of bless your heart, So, but yeah, so I appreciate you having me on, Lee.
Sure.
Hey, you have all these like really, really cool people on, and then you invited me on. And I'm like, what? Why me?
Well, you've had me on your show, so I'll have to turn around and
No, you don't.
reciprocate.
No,
Yeah.
you should not lower yourself. You can delete this episode now, sir. That was the only reason why.
And I did have a listener request to have the guys from Citizen Defense Research on an episode.
Really?
Yes, I did. I don't remember who it was that made it. I could go back and look and probably find it, but I did have a listener request.
Well, that's kind of cool. They probably meant Chris Seipert or Melody or like one of the other people that.
See, you didn't have to point that part out.
Well, it's like, can I have Citizens Defense Research? We've got Citizens Defense Research at home.
Yeah.
It's like, oh,
yeah.
It's like you had Ringo on the show.
Yeah.
You could have had one of the others.
Yeah.
You could have had K.A. Clark talking about his, anything at all.
He's been on the show.
Has he?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Obviously, you haven't been listening to the episodes.
I don't listen to anything anymore, Lee. I've got 2 kids and 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Ask me how much wrangling did we have to do to figure out when we were going to record this?
Yeah. Recording this stuff, funny thing is you got to sit down and do it, or it just doesn't happen.
So back in a previous life, I was a photographer. I was a professional photographer, and I got to spend a day with one of my very favorite authors at the time, and even now, a guy named Patrick Rothfuss. And I was fanboying pretty hard, but I was talking to him, and he's like, "Hey, the only difference between me and anyone else that has ever wanted to write a book," and I go, "What's that?" He goes, "I finished my book."
Yeah.
So it's funny. It's funny how much life is at. And my son is 13 and likes his first girl. And he's, oh my God, if he knew I was talking about this right now, he'd be embarrassed. I'm taking intense pleasure, and he'll never know. But he likes his first girl, and he wants to ask this girl to go to the arcade with him so bad. And he's 13, so it's super innocent right now.
Yeah.
But he's like, "Dad, every time I try and ask, I'm like," and he's like, "What do I do?" And I'm like, "Son, at a certain point, you're just gonna have to do it."
Yeah.
And he's like, "That doesn't help." And I'm like, "But that's what it is." And he's like, and he's like super frustrated with me. I'm like, that's what it is. That's the trick.
Yeah.
So anyway, hey, I really do appreciate it. And anyone that like made it through all of this episode, the thing that I would leave you with is one, I really do appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. It does mean a lot to me. And 2, man, we could be way kinder to each other and way less looking for a reason to not get along, and we'd probably learn a lot more and be a lot happier, and probably be able to advance our art a lot further without this devolving into cliques that we do. And please understand that I say that as someone that was the worst of the worst about all of those things. So I don't talk about anything that I wasn't guilty of. Like, I was super guilty of it. And it's just stop. I was wrong when I did it. And if you're doing it now, you're probably wrong too.
Well, we have been going for quite some time, so there's probably, I guess we need to mercifully end this
I finished my glass of gin too. So,
yeah, for the audience and for us. And
all right.
folks, we understand that your most important asset is your time, and thank you for choosing to spend it with us.